I was driving around town listening to YouTube videos when I heard this section from a Clownfish TV video covering an article from Variety titled, "Why the Fall of Comic Book Movie Culture is Inevitable." Here is a clip that piqued my interest.
This is interesting though. We need these characters to be gods again. And they were until they weren't. Memo to James Gunn, gods have a way of losing power when you stick them in reruns. So not just the oversaturation of these characters, but how these characters are portrayed. They've been trying to humanize superheroes, and Spider-Man's always been like the everyman or whatever, but you don't humanize somebody like Superman or Thor or Captain America. They're supposed to be larger than life. They can relate to humans. They love humans. They protect humans.
A lot of them are human, but
They are, but I'm just saying, but they're supposed to be above it all. They're supposed to be what we aspire to be. Wonder Woman. They're supposed to be what we aspire to be, not, hey, they've got all the freaking hang-ups and problems that we have, except they got superpowers and that's what they've been doing with the comics. They've been dragging these characters through the mud,
And I instantly disagreed. See, every character they listed has human-like qualities. It's why people relate to them in the first place. I'm specifically referring to their cinematic interpretations because that's what this discussion is about. Why the new characters and movies are failing. I'll go even further and explain how all the cinematic versions of the characters listed in the article ended up being relatable and loved, not just the ones Neon listed. Superman in every iteration has human family and friends he cares about. Even in the nightmare realm that was the Snyderverse, Clark goes berserk when Zod threatens his mother, and Lois Lane is the only thing that can return him to his old self in Justice League. It's not the lexicon of superpowers under Superman's belt that makes him a timeless hero. It's the good-natured, almost Boy Scout-esque do-goodery and service to others that makes Superman so loved, especially those individuals he cares about personally. Batman is a self-made superhero who has no powers. On top of that, he has developed a code of ethics for himself that he will not break. He will not kill after witnessing his parents getting gunned down in an alleyway over what he could consider pocket change in the larger scale of his family's wealth. Well, he had a code except for that time Zack Snyder got his hands on him. Spider-Man, as Neon said, is an insanely human superhero. Most iterations of the web crawler have him struggling to get by financially and socially, as he also tries to balance his love life and being Spider-Man. He's often considered one of the most tragic superheroes because he tries to live as normal a life as possible, but sometimes the superhero gig reveals its occupational hazards and those he cares about get caught in the crossfire. Wonder Woman starts her solo movie as an idealistic, starry-eyed child, mentally, who believes that humanity is at war because of a single entity fueling their bloodlust, rather than the truth that man is violent by nature. She also fell in love with a man, and his death caused her enough distress and trauma that she hid away from the world. That is until Patty Jenkins fumbled the ball by forcing Ares into the story and then retconning her into being a rapist who forgot that she was superheroing around in 1984, that is. Best believe a video about retcons is in my sights. Captain America. Oh man, Cap is awesome. He started his career as a young man who just wanted to serve his country in what he believed was the war to end all wars. Even though he was a scrawny kid from Brooklyn, he had the fight of a man thrice his size in his heart. When faced with the reality that he needed to crash a plane he was on into the Arctic to save millions, Steve accepted his fate, even though he wanted to go back to Peggy Carter and be with her. Thor started the MCU as a vain, cruel boy in Odin's words, but he developed into a man who knew that he had a responsibility to maintain peace in the Nine Realms rather than to seek glory in battle at the cost of war. As the MCU goes on, Thor loses his entire family and nearly all of his friends by the time we roll around into Infinity War. In that film, we finally see that Thor is deeply affected by this, possibly even seeing the truth in his father's words back in the first movie, as war and combat have taken nearly all of his family. The Hulk is the embodiment of the duality of man. Within him are two men vying for control and freedom. Bruce wants to remain in control because the Hulk causes insane amounts of collateral damage and death. But also, the Hulk doesn't like being stamped down and imprisoned within Bruce, only to be called upon when he's useful. Both sides of this debate have valid points. The Hulk can't be left unchecked, but Bruce can't take away another person's freedom. And it would have been cool to see the resolution of this conflict on screen, but I guess we don't deserve good things anymore. Black Panther is a man who uses the murder of his father to fuel his fight for justice and vengeance. He is more concerned about justice rather than hedonistic revenge and bloodlust. When Zemo attempts to shoot himself, T'Challa prevents him from doing so because allowing him to die would mean he escapes justice. I'm gonna be real with you, after Civil War, T'Challa kinda stops being a character. And it's unfortunate because Chadwick Boseman's passing means there will never be a possibility to see this character develop like the others. But there's one character no one has mentioned yet, and he was the best the MCU had to offer. Tony Stark in the MCU needs no introduction. This character's arc in the first Iron Man was iconic and became the formula several comic book movies followed after its release. There isn't a single moment in pre-Phase 4 MCU where Tony behaves out of character. But today I want to break down the fundamentals of character building so that you aspiring writers can make your own well-written and solid characters. Before we get started, if you'd like to support me and check out a novel from an indie author, hit the link in the description and take a look at my sci-fi military series Blur Havoc. Or if you'd like, check out my Patreon, Subscribestar, or affiliate links. If anything, a like and subscription are enough. It would be much appreciated. If you recall in my Kang the Clown video, I stated this. You need to make sure your villain is a character first, especially if you are going to take the route of making a villain that gets redeemed or is supposed to be sympathetic. This is why Kang fails on so many levels. Not only is he a terrible villain, but he's a paper-thin character who gives us nothing in terms of who he is as an actual person. The foundation of a good villain is that they themselves are a character. What I didn't mention is that this foundation also has its own criteria, but it will get much more interesting. More on that later. Much like my Kang the Clown video, there are a few points that are needed to make your protagonist, side character, or even your villain into a legitimate character. Here are the 6 points of a good character. Drive. Fatal flaw. A save the cat / kick the dog moment. Traumas and loss. Purpose. Core belief. So what do I mean by these? Let's break them down. Drive is the thing that gets your character out of bed every morning. What is the thing that keeps them going when things are tough? Is it their parents? Is it their spouse? Is it their kids? Is it their thirst for vengeance? What pushes them to get up and go? This is not the same as purpose, by the way. More on that later. Fatal flaw is exactly what it says on the tin. What is the one flaw that they have that is going to get them killed one day? And no, it can't be their flaw is that they are just too cool, too sexy, and too awesome. Instead of too kind, it has to be too trusting or too naive. Instead of too cool, it has to be vain or obsessed with vanity. It has to be something that is objectively a flaw, such as not letting someone who is abhorrent live, even if it would be tactically beneficial to do so, or that they will go to any length to save innocent lives. Hint, hint. Traumas and loss means that your character has to experience a loss or have trauma in some capacity. Something bad has to happen to them. It can occur before the story as a form of character development, but something must occur within the story. Not only does this give your character a reason for a multitude of things, as I will discuss in a moment, but it also adds some grit and struggle to your character and their journey. Your audience needs to see that your character has worked hard for their keep and nothing was handed to them on a silver platter. The save the cat moment was not coined by me, but by one Blake Snyder. In his book Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need, he describes the save the cat moment as this.
The hero has to do something when we meet him so that we like him and want him to win.
Your character needs to give the audience a reason to not only give a damn about them, but to want them to survive and get what they want. It's an establishing moment or piece of information that's meant to make your character likable or at least redeemable. Granted, you can't just have one save the cat moment and then have your main character do unspeakable, horrible things and think everything is going to be gravy. I'll be making a whole video on this book soon, so stay tuned for that. Seriously, if you are trying to get into writing and want solid advice, you need to read this book. For your villain, you want the antithesis to this moment, the kick the dog moment, a scene or moment that establishes the menace or vile personality of your villain. More on that later, but in any case, you want some kind of character establishing moment that shows the audience who this character is as a person. Purpose is the reason your character exists in the first place. Why is your character here? A side character can have an in-universe reason or a meta reason, but the main character needs to have an in-universe reason for their inclusion. You need to give them a purpose that requires you to rewrite the entire story if you remove that character. As stated in my Godzilla video, you should not be able to remove or consolidate characters and the consequence of the plot remains the same. And last but certainly not least is your character's core belief. What is the one kernel of their soul that will never ever change? If placed in a room and given a choice to break their core belief, your character must not do it, no matter how much money, fame, or vagina/penis is on the table. This is called a what you are in the dark test, by the way. As the quote on the TV Tropes page says, character is what you are in the dark. Alternatively, your character's core belief could be something that they believe about themselves or other people that rests deep within their heart, something that they are obsessed with. But with this one, I'm holding something back. You'll see soon. The best part is that these 6 cornerstones are synergetic, meaning that they can play well with each other if you know what you're doing. You can set up your character so that their trauma or loss is also their drive, making them so afraid of something that it forces them into action. Or, as I stated earlier, Batman's core belief was created by his trauma and loss. Scott Lang's Save the Cat moment, drive, and purpose are all wrapped up in his daughter Cassie. A character's drive can also be their fatal flaw, such as Jafar from Aladdin, where his hunger for power is what becomes his downfall. The character's drive and core belief can be a part of their fatal flaw. Their core belief can be formed by their Save the Cat moment. These 6 points don't have to be isolated from each other. They can work together to strengthen your character. But instead of just doing the rundown with Tony Stark, we're going to compare him to his new, diverse, and empowering replacement, Riri Williams. Mainly because I know a lot of you will drop out of the video if I don't completely shit on something within this runtime, but also because deconstructing a character to see why they don't work is also an invaluable resource. We'll be learning so much more by also taking apart Riri's character. This is going to be fun. We'll be discussing both characters' first appearances in the MCU. Iron Man 1 for Tony and Black Panther Wakanda Forever for Riri. I know what you're thinking, but Alastor, Wakanda Forever isn't about Riri. That's not fair. Well, guess who weren't the main characters of Civil War but were still built into solid characters in their first appearance in the MCU? These two. Starting with drive, we learn in Iron Man 1 that Tony's drive is that he cannot sit idly as the consequences of his actions harm innocent people. When he learns that the weapons that he developed are in the hands of terrorists, Tony tries his hardest to solve this problem stateside, but his second-in-command gets in the way. Because of his drive, Tony takes drastic measures and believes that direct intervention is necessary. Even when told to his face that Obadiah betrayed him, this doesn't stop Tony from completing his goal. Riri, on the other hand, is not given much. What motivates Riri to do anything in this film? Why did she build a power suit? She explains that she built the vibranium detector for a school project simply because her professor said she'd never be able to. Pretty vain reason, but okay. The only solid reason I can find is that she's black and gifted, so that's why she wakes up and does what she does every day. Okay. Next we have Fatal Flaw. Now, Tony doesn't really fall into this flaw until the first Avengers, but the skeleton for this point is formed here. Tony's fatal flaw is that he is willing to do insane shit in order to protect the lives of the innocent. In this film, he dons power armor and flies into another country through restricted airspace to destroy the weapons used by the 10 Rings to terrorize the innocent. He also puts his entire corporation at financial risk by shutting down the weapons manufacturing division, costing many people their jobs. At the end of the film, he instructs Pepper to throw the switch that would overload the arc reactor, even with the possibility that he will get caught in the devastation. It's funny that some people think Tony only became capable of self-sacrifice in Avengers 1 after Steve criticized him when, truthfully, Steve made an incorrect assumption about Tony. Tony was always capable of self-sacrifice. Now, Riri Williams' fatal flaw. I'd argue it's her inability to shut the fuck up and her ability to give Michael Bay characters a run for their money on the annoyance scale, but the film treats her as if she's funny and endearing, so I can't say it is her internal story flaw. Riri doesn't have a fatal flaw in this movie. Everything she does in this movie is viewed as correct or understandable. When the police block Okoye and Shiri's way in the road, Riri either successfully kills or at least attempts to murder these cops with a downed UAV. The movie has absolutely nothing to say about this. It kind of comes across as if the thing Riri did was cool or something. Tony's Save the Cat moment appears in his film later than Save the Cat moments usually show up. Usually you want your Save the Cat moment to happen within the first act, but Tony is a different kind of character. We open to a Tony who is honestly a cocky jackass. He mentions how he's slept with copious amounts of women, he's drinking liquor while being transported by soldiers, and even mentions how he'd be out of a job if there was peace. He also misses his award speech in order to gamble and get schmoozy with a reporter so he can take her to Bone Town later. You begin the movie thinking, this guy's fun to watch, but he's a jackass and I hope something bad happens to him. But as you see from the in media res intro, something bad does happen to Tony. But his Save the Cat moment is in the second act when the 10 Rings leader threatens to put a molten piece of metal in Jensen's mouth and Tony stands up for him, sparing Jensen a cruel fate. This moment shows us that Tony may be a jackass, but he has the potential to be a caring man who won't stand by and let an innocent person be hurt if he has the ability to do something. His Save the Cat moment is also a part of his character development. It's brilliant. Now, Riri isn't just missing a Save the Cat moment. She has a Kick the Dog moment. Riri's introduction and establishing character moment involves her doing another student's work for them and her fee for him being $800. But because the student forgot and didn't pay sooner, she increases her fee to $1,000. Yeah, the student should have done his own schoolwork, but price gouging doesn't seem very nice, does it? Then when Shuri enters Riri's room, as we established earlier, she says that she's young, gifted, and black, and hurls insults at Okoye. There isn't a single moment in this movie that tells us, hey, this character is a decent human being under this rough, conceited, and mean exterior. No, Riri helping defeat Namor does not count. We'll get to that shit in a moment. Let's take a moment and go back to that scene where Riri has her Kick the Dog moment and change this into a Save the Cat moment. Instead of what we have, make it so that the student is thankful for Riri's help with the project. Riri tells him that she will help him anytime he needs it because she likes the challenge and it keeps her skills sharp. It makes it look less like Riri is money hungry and more like she's more passionate about honing her skills and mind. If you want Riri to get paid, make it so that the student gives her money because he wants to, not because Riri is charging him. She could initially decline payment, but the student could insist, setting her up to be humble. It still accomplishes the objective of making Riri look hyper competent without making her look like a complete jackass. But nah, the student is a white guy, so we gotta shit on him. Tony Stark's trauma and loss. I feel like this shit isn't even fair to compare at this point, but I'll only be referring to his first outing, which will make this comparison a little less lopsided. Tony gets assaulted in an ambush and captured by the Ten Rings, not before nearly getting killed by his own weaponry, which has to fuck with you mentally. He then proceeds to get locked up, tortured, and forced to recreate his new prototype Jericho missile. All of these events leave a profound mark on Tony's psyche and mental health, and he only gains more trauma as the series goes on, but we won't mention that in this conversation. Riri, on the other hand, has maybe one moment in her entire runtime where something constitutes as a loss or trauma. When Namor throws a water bomb at the palace and somehow drowns Queen Ramonda and nearly kills Riri. This is enough for Riri to bear this burden, apparently, as she laments that Ramonda died saving Riri. See, this doesn't work for a metric fuck ton of reasons. It sucks on a character level, a writing level, a logical level, and a villain level. I would explain everything, but I don't want this to be the length of one of Mahler's unbridled rages, so I'll only cover why this sucks for Riri. The Queen and Riri didn't need to be here. As soon as there was a word of an attack, Riri and the Queen should have evacuated the vulnerable and transparent throne room and descended into a bunker under the palace or something. These systems that they're accessing should be available in the safety of a bunker or emergency egress point outside of the palace. Are you telling me that the supposedly primitive United States has a better contingency plan for the president during a crisis than the technologically superior Wakanda has for their queen? And it also doesn't make sense when the queen tells Riri to leave. Like, no? How about both of you leave? There's no reason either of you need to be here. I didn't even notice this until I was editing, but they screwed up Riri's character even more by making her initially walk off when the queen tells her to leave and then realize, wait a minute, I'm leaving the queen alone with a hyper murderous mutant. I shouldn't do that. Maybe you should have wrote it the other way around where she doesn't move and then says, hey, I'm not leaving. I don't know, maybe you guys don't want to make a good character. I don't know, I'm just giving you guys advice that you didn't ask for. Then the queen drowns, saving Riri, even though this shot implies the queen managed to lift an unconscious Riri out of the water and push her away from the hole, only to flop onto her face and fucking die right afterward as Namor watched the whole thing. The queen was acting so fucking stupid throughout this entire sequence that nobody in their right mind could blame Riri for the queen's death. This is also why Riri wanting to help defeat Namor doesn't count as a save the cat moment. Riri shouldn't feel like this is her fault. She should be saying, the queen was tripping, bro, like a dumbass, and she died like one too. The end, bro. I'm allowed to use a stereotypical accent. I'm black. Long story short, Riri's trauma gets undercut by the bad writing in this scene. And you can bet your ass that they're never going to mention this quote-unquote trauma ever again. Not even in that 6-episode show that is coming out in 20XX if we're being generous. I didn't even mention how Riri never has to work hard for anything in this film. Vibranium detector, the hardest part was buying stencil sheets large enough for the blueprints. Prototype suit, she just made that shit in her spare time. Laptop encryption, so strong that shit don't even exist. New armor? Wakanda provided the materials for her. They even ape Tony's nighttime flight sequence, and it feels like a made-for-TV adaptation of that scene. Compare how easy Riri has it to how Obadiah summarizes how Tony built his first suit.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
And that's understating how stressful the situation was for him. Nah, don't sweat it. Tony just needed to be
young, gifted, and black.
Duh. Here we arrive at purpose. Tony's is easy. His purpose in the story is to right the wrongs his company did by double dealing to the US military and the Ten Rings. He saw young US soldiers get gunned down by the very weapons he created, and later saw the Ten Rings terrorize innocent civilians with his weapons as well. It's the constant through line for all of his actions within his first film. Riri, on the other hand, has no in-universe reason for existing in this film besides explaining who created the vibranium detector. Riri's presence in the film is the equivalent of a COD Warzone skin. The external appearance of the character could be changed and the movie remains the same. After Riri gets taken to Wakanda, her relevance in the story is greatly diminished and could honestly be removed entirely. The writers could have easily written it so that Shuri figured out what Namora's racially insensitive weakness was without Riri there. What exactly did Riri do in the final battle that warranted her presence? She provided a distraction for Namor until the ship could capture him, but we also had the Midnight Angels who could have done the exact same thing. The rest of the final battle, Riri is shockingly absent for most of it, and then forgets that she can fucking fly in the last third. Her presence in the film could honestly be completely erased, or at least whittled down to a cameo like Ulysses Klaue from Age of Ultron. But she has quite a few reasons in a meta sense. Firstly, she's here to serve as a visual advertisement for her Disney Plus series, and that much is quite transparent. And secondly, there's a slightly less obvious reason for her inclusion. Watch this Target ad.
Wakanda's changed things forever. Now, nothing seems impossible. So how will you share your brilliance with the world?
Here, will it work? This center, so the whole thing.
Keep forging your own path.
We still need something.
Keep reaching for what inspires you. And keep shining for everyone to see.
Hey, can I see what you're drawing there?
Yeah, this is a working model for an energy source.
Okay, I see you, young genius.
After all, you never know where you'll find inspiration.
Bye.
Bring the next great idea to life.
See, there's been this really big push for women in STEM recently, and even more so with black women. Riri's inclusion in Wakanda Forever was almost purely political and ideological. Of course, there's nothing wrong with women in STEM, but the problem here is that Riri is not a character, she is a token, a character who was inserted into the story to make people clap like seals and tweet like maniacs, a character whose sole existence is to check a box, even if that box was already checked by another pre-established character. The actual women in STEM are not these hollow caricatures such as Riri. They're real people with real personalities and real pasts that fuel their passion, dedication, and drive. Their reasons for their dedication go beyond just being young, gifted, and black. And to offer up this hollow husk of a character and expect the target audience to clap is a huge slap in the face. Finally, we've reached the core belief, and Tony's core belief in his first film is revealed in this one scene.
This was a board of directors meeting.
This was a board of directors meeting?
The board is claiming you have post-traumatic stress. They're filing an injunction.
A what?
They want to lock you out.
Company. Why?
Tony, the board has rights too. They're making the case that you and your new direction isn't in the company's best interest.
I'm being responsible. That's a new direction for me, for the company.
Tony genuinely believes that he must atone for his sins. That's why he slipped up and stated that his actions were a new direction for himself, then redacted his statement. No amount of pressure from the board of directors, the public, or even his mentor Obadiah will push him off this path. In a later scene, we see that Obadiah is the one who filed the injunction. With what feels like the entire world up against his decision, Tony takes matters into his own hands. Riri, conversely, has nothing, no core belief that informs us of what is heavy on her heart, or the thing that keeps her awake at night. It seems as though she's willing and ready to do anything the plot demands of her. We have no clue why Riri is willing to lay her life down for Wakanda when a mere day prior, she was more concerned about her university class. As stated earlier, she shouldn't really be blaming herself for the Queen's death, and her bond with Shuri doesn't seem strong enough to dedicate her life to protecting the Black Sisterhood or whatever the fuck is going on here. The extent of her help should really be as a tech assistant who remains in the lab or something, not laying her life down for a country she doesn't even live in, let alone a country she has no reason to swear her allegiance to. Let's go back and take a look at that scene during the chase where Riri drops the drone on the cops. Wouldn't it have been interesting if one of Riri's core beliefs was that she would not do anything that would endanger law enforcement? It would force her and the writers to solve this problem in a different and more creative way than just bombing them like the US bombs the Middle East. But Riri having no core belief isn't a bad thing in isolation, just in the larger picture. I want to explain how by breaking down one of my own characters again. She ended up being one of the most entertaining characters for me to write. Let me break down the dreaded bounty hunter Valana Brandy. No spoilers for my book series this time. I actually want you to read about this character because the way she twists, turns, and develops through the plot is wild. Valana's drive initially comes across as simply money, but that's just on the surface. She sees money as a tool that will help her achieve her goals. The more she can amass, the quicker her goals can be achieved. Her drive is actually the thought of power and influence, as that is her true goal. Valana's fatal flaw is her cockiness and overambition. At the hint of an opportunity to make a power play, Valana will take it, even if it ends up backfiring in some capacity. The possibility of getting a leg up overshadows the potential ramifications. Her actions in Blur Havoc 2 are a prime example of this. Valana straight up does not have a save the cat moment. She actually has what I call a frazzle the hero moment in Blur Havoc 2. A very severe downplay of the Worf effect if you're familiar with TV tropes. See, the main character of the trilogy, who I am going to call Book Alastor from here on out, is a snarky Bugs Bunny type of character who, even in the face of the first book's antagonist Rise, often makes jokes and quips about the situation he's in, usually as a response to stress or fear. Valana, however, is a character whose mere appearance triggers a panic attack within Book Alastor. When dealing with Valana in her introductory scene, Book Alastor makes no jokes, going so far as to threaten to slice her hand off if she touches him again. She doesn't even need to do anything, she just disorients Book Alastor that much. As the book goes on, you learn why Book Alastor is so unnerved by and apprehensive of Valana. For her trauma and loss, I did something a little different. I took a page out of Han Solo's book and made Valana's backstory a mystery. There are hints and allusions to what she went through before her appearance in the trilogy, but I don't, and never will, reveal what exactly she went through. It's one of those cases where the mystery will always be greater than the answer to the mystery. But as a writer, you should still know the answers to the questions your audience has. More on that in a bit. She also is a formidable fighter who gives everyone she fights a run for their money, but that doesn't mean she won't get sacked every once in a while. There's a part early on in Blur Havoc 2 where Rise nearly kills her. Valana has many purposes in the plot, making her removal extremely noticeable. Firstly, she's supposed to be a mirror opposite version of Book Alastor's love interest Melanie. Tall versus short, dark-skinned versus light-skinned, and overtly sensual versus innocent. She also acts as the ferryman, or ferrywoman in this case, for Book Alastor into Act 2 of Blur Havoc 2. She escorts him into the upside-down world of Act 2 to meet the new characters that inhabit this world. And within the story, she's a hired bounty hunter who gets paid very well to do the bidding of Roark, a mysterious man with a wealth of knowledge and a bottomless pit of resources. She's here for the long haul, whether Book Alastor likes it or not, and she does something else that I can't say because it's a massive spoiler. But what I can say is that her actions in Blur Havoc 2 create the conflict in Blur Havoc 3, and removing her changes everything. And finally, Valana's core belief. You ready for this? She doesn't have one. Yes, Volana is a bounty hunter for hire. There is next to nothing she won't do if the price is high enough. There's no child she won't strangle, no dog she won't kick, and no politician she won't fuck and then assassinate as long as it brings in the cheddar. Blood money, dead money, and blue money are all the same to Volana. The only thing she probably won't do is naughty stuff with a non-adult, if you catch what I'm saying. But you see, the reason why Volana missing a core belief works for her is because it operates in service to who she is as a character. It makes sense for a power-hungry, ambitious, and hyper-violent bounty hunter to not have any morals or values. But Riri Williams, a hero who is supposed to be one of the paragons of her society? No, absolutely not. She needs a core belief if you're going to tell us that she's supposed to be someone who will lay down her life for the greater good. It's missing the point of what a hero is supposed to be. The people that write this shit think that being a hero is about fighting the bad guy and looking cool while you do it, when it isn't. It's about using the abilities you've been given to service those less fortunate than you, or to prevent the same tragedies that befell you from reoccurring. The final entry of this trilogy of videos is going to be about how to create a hero, so I'll go into more detail when I make that video. But for now, let me show you some of the tricks I use to create a character. So, I got a question. Do you own any of these games? Mass Effect 1, 2, 3, or Andromeda, Elder Scrolls Skyrim, Fallout 3, 4, or New Vegas, Cyberpunk 2077, Baldur's Gate 3, Dragon Age Origins or Inquisition, or any other RPGs with diverging storylines, choices, and customizable characters. I have great news for you. You are now equipped with some of the best character building tools in the entire world. Here's how. Boot up your game of choice and start a new game. Make your in-game character look like the character you want to create for your story. Make it as close as you can to how your character looks in your head. Then spec your character or choose a class that fits your character's fighting style or personality. Now, play the game, but instead of making the choices that lead to the optimal resolution, make choices that your character would make in these situations. For example, let's say I'm doing a playthrough of Mass Effect 3 with my character Volana in Shepard's role. When faced with the choice to cure the genophage or sabotage it, what do you think Volana would do? Because loyalty means nothing to her, only hard assets and power, Volana would easily sabotage the genophage and kill Mordin in the process. Repeat this with as many games as you want until you get a good idea of what your character believes and how they think. I suggest doing this in Cyberpunk because the choices in that game are way harder to make than most of the other games I listed, on top of the fact that many of the choices have no benefit or detriment to them. They are almost completely moral conundrums. What this does is that it gets you into the very necessary practice of entering your character's headspace and thinking like your character would, which, as a writer or critic, that skill is invaluable. If you want, you can even extend this into tabletop gaming. Grab a character creation sheet for Dungeons & Dragons, Cyberpunk Red, Dark Heresy, or Pathfinder, and spec your character according to their abilities and fighting style. The specking of your character is very important if you're going to write a story that involves fighting, powers, abilities, and power scaling. It's crucial that you get a good grasp on what your character's limits are in combat. Otherwise, you end up with Justice League, where the power scaling is all out of whack. I also want to make a video on dialogue, but here's a fun exercise that will solidify your character's voice and establish the dynamic they have with the rest of your cast. Go to a website that has a random name picker that lets you add your own names. Make each entry a separate character, excluding the character you are working on. Now run the picker and write a hypothetical conversation between your character and the character you picked with the name picker. It doesn't matter if these two characters will never meet in the story. You need to know how your character will behave in every situation and iron out their vocal cadence. If they have an accent, this is where you'll nail it down and solidify it. Any verbal tics and idiosyncrasies get finalized here too. You can tell when I did this exercise because the way Valana speaks in her brief appearance in Paragon War versus how she speaks in Blur Havoc 2 is very different. Finally, you want to develop your character's backstory before you add them into the story. Why? Because your character's backstory will inform their decisions moving forward. A character whose beloved father was killed by bees will most likely have a fear or hatred of bees. They won't own a whole beehive in their backyard and have a bee-inspired superhero costume. For example, with Valana, I do know what her backstory is, but I don't explain it. However, you can see little hints of what it is throughout her appearances, such as one scene in Blur Havoc 2 where she expresses concern over being seen as ugly over something that is alluded to being out of her control and forced upon her. So for this exercise, you want to sit down and write this one sentence on a sheet of paper. How did they get here? Then answer that question. Keep writing until the character's backstory connects to the plot of your story. It is going to be messy as hell, but it will probably never be seen by anyone except for yourself. You can even go backwards. What were they doing right before the story started? Why? What were they doing before that? Why? And before that? Why? Just keep doing that repeatedly until you either reach a point where it stops developing in an interesting way or you reach your character's birth. If your character's parents are in the plot, you know damn well what you're gonna have to do next, buddy. Even for a character like Isabella in my series who doesn't have some super interesting backstory, you need to know your character's little slice of history. It's crucial to understanding their course throughout your story or series. Notice how I didn't say a specific word was one of the cornerstones of a good character. Development. That's because your character doesn't necessarily need to develop in order to be a great character. Take Batman, for instance. We don't watch countless Batman movies, TV shows, and play Batman games to see him change and stray away from who he is. He's a static character and we tune in to see how he triumphs over all the challenges and obstacles in his way. What makes his stories interesting is his core belief of his dedication to non-lethal solutions. When Batman is tasked with something insane such as a reverse hostage situation where the gunmen are the hostages and the hostages are the bad guys, the interesting part is seeing how he saves the day without breaking his rule. That's why the person writing Batman needs to be either really intelligent or very thorough. It's up to you whether you want a static character like Batman or a dynamic character who changes like Tony Stark. But the key is to understand what makes a static character interesting to watch in the first place. Another example, let's look at the Doomslayer. There is nothing in the world that will stop him from destroying all the demons and sending them back to hell. Seeing the character's reactions to the Slayer's actions and how the Slayer tramples over these obstacles are what provide most of the entertainment value in a character like him. Speaking of the Slayer, there's something quite interesting about him. He's a static character who was once a dynamic character. His backstory is revealed in Doom Eternal and shows us that he wasn't always the nigh invincible demon hunter you see in the game. That brings me to my conclusion. Character writing is a very fluid process. Just because your character started in one place or disposition doesn't mean they have to end there or that their path needs to be straightforward. Take Thor in the MCU, for example. The Thor we see in his first film is not the same character we see in Infinity War, and I mean that literally. The Thor in Infinity War is more down to earth and transparent than the Thor from 2011 who was a stoic brute. Where you falter is when you become inconsistent with your character writing, such as Thor in Endgame and beyond. Now he's a goofball who doesn't take much seriously after becoming a sloppy fat drunk who curses kids out on Fortnite. Where's the weight of the lives lost in his life? The weight of half of your brothers and sisters in arms dying? I'm not saying Thor should be a moping sad sack of shit who broods all day, but we should feel the heaviness of his presence. A character who does this right is John Wick. He has some humorous and lighthearted moments, but he still carries himself as someone who has lost the better half of his life and the dog she left him that was supposed to help him cope with her death. Roping this back to Tony Stark. Tony's character has changed from static to dynamic and back depending on what the story needs. He's dynamic in Iron Man 1 and 2, static in Iron Man 3, dynamic in Captain America Civil War, back to static in Infinity War, then back to dynamic in the Endgame. And changes to characters can even happen off screen as long as it makes sense, or at the very least is explained to the audience sufficiently. That's the reason why Luke's portrayal in TLJ was so maligned. It was not explained sufficiently. Anyway, that's it for today's class. Next time we'll be talking about how to make a good hero. And it's going to be a blast because we're going to dissect why Carol Danvers isn't one. See you next time.